Hello, and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders shy away from. We believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. I'm your host, Jeff Ma. I'm a director at Softway, an agency based out of Houston, Texas, that specializes in digital transformation, culture, and branding. Each episode here, we dive deep into an element of business or strategy and really test our theory of love against it. And today, we want to talk about Agile transformation. Now, in episode 3, we had already talked about digital transformation, and we broached this topic a little bit and intentionally kept it high level and away from it so we could have a separate episode just on this specifically. And even this one probably won't cover the vast topic of Agile and Agile transformation. But for now, I want to zoom in a little bit more on one major aspect that makes digital transformations work, which is the Agile component specifically. With me, I have a couple of usual suspects, and also we're bringing back Maggie. So Maggie is our beloved project manager and producer of the show, and she joined us last episode, and we loved it so much we invited her back. So I'll start with Maggie. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
And your icebreaker question is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I wrote this question and I don't even have an answer. I think the thing that just keeps coming to mind is when I was a kid, my parents just instilled into me, just be kind to everyone, no matter what. You don't know their circumstances or, what they're going through. So kindness, be kind, no matter what, is probably the best advice that's gotten me this far in life. So
I love it. Next, we have Chris Petrie, Vice President, Softway. Chris, welcome.
Hi, good to be here.
I love I'm reading these questions for the first time as I bring them up. I love it. I love it so much. As a child, Chris, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I have phases. So it's a three-parter for me.
Oh gosh.
So the first aspiration was an anesthesiologist. But this is where I learned that following after people is not really my, thing. So I had a friend, her name was Catherine. I won't say her last name for sake of privacy, but she was like, I'm going to be an anesthesiologist. I was like, well, now I'm going to be an anesthesiologist. And then I was like, wait, I don't want to stay in school forever. So then I was like, I'm going to be a veterinarian. And so my first job was actually at a vet clinic. And then when I sat in my first surgery and I realized that I could never cut into an animal, that's when I was like, okay, new mission in life. And that's when I decided on advertising. And so it was a 3-phased thing.
And all that was as a child?
Yes.
That's incredible. As a child, I didn't know anything about what I wanted to be. So that's impressive that you had 3 things you wanted to be.
Oh, yeah.
Mohammed Anwar, President CEO, is also here with us. Welcome, Mohammed.
Hey, Jeff.
So your question is, what's the best book you've ever read?
Oh, I don't know about the best book, but the book that's had the most impact on me was When Millennials Take Over. So that's a book that was very transformational for me to read.
Awesome. Yeah, that comes up quite a bit in how we got here today as a company. So,
Mo, Are you a millennial?
Apparently, by some definition, I am. I was born in 1982, so.
Ooh, I think you're a cusper.
Yeah, he's a cusper.
Right on the cusp of Gen X.
But is it an age or is it a mindset, y'all? Come on.
Mm-hmm.
It's both. I'd say it's both.
Okay. I guess I need to read the book to know more about it. Okay.
Like Beyonce's on the cusp too. So if that makes you feel included.
I think in that book they defined it from 1980.
Yes, it's 1980, and Beyonce was 81. You're 82, right? I'm 84.
It's like we made it. We made it. How many episodes without a Beyonce reference from
Far too long. Too long.
Here, the floodgates are open. I'm fully expecting.
Just make sure to tag her in the show notes.
There you go.
Yeah, Beyonce, if you're listening, Chris is a super. I think super fan is an understatement.
A healthy obsession is what I say.
Borderlining unhealthy, but yes.
Yeah.
let's dive into this. And Mo, I'm really going to actually put you on the spot here because, obviously Softway and Agile, we have a relationship, and you've been at the helm of that. So please help us kind of understand this two-parter. What is an Agile transformation, and why is it important?
Sure. Before I go into defining Agile transformation, I want to talk about how organizations predominantly are structured. They're structured to be a command and control type of organization with a very top-down approach, where all the directives in the organization come from the top level executives going down to the rest of the organization to go do stuff. And in an Agile transformation, it's the act where the companies are transforming from that command and control mindset or top-down mindset to become an organization that thrives in flexible collaboration, self-organizing, and changing environments. And the biggest thing I take away from there is changing environments. Given where we are in the state of COVID-19 in 2020, there's so much uncertainty and so much change happening around us that it's a way for organizations to be able to embrace the change that happens around them. Agile transformation allows companies to be able to operate in times of uncertainty and deal with the ever-changing things that are constantly happening around us. And it allows them to have a competitive edge over other businesses if they've embraced Agile in the right way. So Agile can be very powerful for organizations to survive in a highly competitive environment, this ever-changing nature of business, or uncertainty like the COVID-19 situation. Those could be some of the benefits.
Awesome. That's great. And I kind of want to move into, when we talk about Agile transformation, I think it's important to try to share what we think is the key to a successful Agile transformation, because it is a transformation. You're trying to go from point A to point B. So Maggie, let me pick on you. As a project manager, I see you as, in the trenches at the front lines of, being agile and with people. And can you kind of give that perspective, like what you've seen? What is the key that you've seen at that level of a successful Agile transformation?
So I think the thing for me, so it needs to start with your leaders, of course, which I think we all agree with, but not just the one time saying that we're going to go through this transformation, but it's the constant reinforcement and the constant reminding of, oh no, we used to think this way, but now we're going to think this way. We used to do things this way, but now we're going to do things this way. Because as humans, we're resistant to change. It's just natural. We don't naturally enjoy it, and we don't like to gravitate towards change. We like to do what we've done forever. And so it's when you don't have that example to look to in your leaders, it's really hard to remind yourself of to even go through the process, but even to decide that it's worth it. And so for me as a project manager, I look to the leaders above me because I know people on my teams are looking at me, and I feel that responsibility of trying to remind teams why it's even important in the first place. I think that's the first hurdle you have to get over.
It's a really good point. I think if you Google Agile transformation, you get like a 10-step regimented kind of process on how to get through it. And I think it paints this picture like it's this, yes, you have to plan for it and have a strategy for it. But I think many leaders, especially higher up, might get the idea that they can just kind of take that framework and apply it to their business and see some results, right? And I think what we're going to explore today more so is why that might be problematic. So let me just dive right into that then. We just talked about successful Agile transformation. Does anyone have anything else to add on that? Sorry, before I move on. I know I didn't ask.
No, I think we're good to move on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in the opposite spectrum, Agile transformation statistically fails quite often as well. Studies have shown that it is I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but a large portion of companies who attempt this fail. So can we dive into why that is? And Maggie opened with leaders. Anyone want to add into that?
Yeah, I can speak firsthand, having to try agile transformation at Softway over the last 9 or 10 years. I've had several different failed attempts at transforming the organization's ability to adapt to agile. And one of the biggest things that I've learned through the series of failed attempts is that it really came down to even how I was embracing agile. When I first started, it was all about process. I came in like, hey, I heard agile is like this great thing that can help our business have this competitive advantage and get things done faster and like tackle change. And where I think I personally may have had a big learning there was that I never took the time to really understand that agile had to start with me, the mindsets and the behaviors that go with an agile organization. And while I was pushing our teams to go do projects in an agile framework like Scrum, I was still operating the business from a non-agile lens. I was still operating from a command and control mindset and expecting my teams in their pockets to be able to adapt agile and be successful. And what I realized was that I was becoming the biggest obstacle in my teams being able to adapt agile, because I was pushing them to go adapt this framework and these processes. And here I was still operating from an old mindset of command and control.
I remember
my biggest learning.
I remember those days very well too, because the funny thing about that is that at the time it's not easy to identify that. At the time, we were just struggling with agile and wondering why it wasn't working.
Yes.
And I think the other thing, as far as how it could fail, is if you are in a situation where you're being told to go agile, you quickly can become a victim where you're just like, wait, why me? Like, what did I like? I don't know this. Like, nobody trained me. Nobody so like, right. And you quickly find all the excuses as to why you can't move forward, or why it's going to fail, or why it's not going to work, or why the client is not going to be successful, or right. You start reaching for straws because, as we said before, change is scary, right? So I'd rather show you why it's not going to work than actually understand and embrace the change and sort of adapt, or at least just test it out, right? Try it once, right? And like for me, I know that I personally, have heard about Agile, but it was always from the software development lens. I was like, I'm never gonna have to worry about that, right? I'm not in software development. I'm not a technologist. I don't do that, right? And so, in looking at how Agile can benefit even non-software development functions inside of an organization, it's been for me transformational and just like interesting, if you're a fan of social experiments, just to see what's possible when you just embrace a mindset, even if you're not doing all of the practices and ceremonies that you hear about full out. You can still understand that, hey, there's actually a better, faster, or an easier way to learn how to get to an outcome versus, this linear waterfall. Let me go and wait till it's perfect before we release it. And then once it's perfect and released, then we get feedback. And by the time we take that feedback and apply it, everything is stale. The world has changed. I'm older, right? Like all these things have happened. And it's one of those things where, like, even if you're not in a software or an IT role, seeing an HR team become agile, where we're looking at how we can sort of build things with teams and with the actual employees versus creating all of these procedures and policies. It helps to really shift how we can support and serve the employees that we have in all of our offices.
This reminds me of, we've done a lot of consulting around this for clients and with clients, and we would go in and we'd ask about their struggles, and you'd get a laundry list of reasons why they were struggling with Agile. And what we found is that it all ladders up to kind of the same two things, right? It's leaders and it's mindsets and behaviors. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's leaders, mindsets, behaviors. And that was just this, like, even when you talk, some people would say, oh, Agile transformation won't work for us because our legacy kind of process and systems are just top down, and that's how we input our stuff and that's how it outputs. It's been like that for years. And so trying this Agile stuff just doesn't work. And when you really think about what they're saying that they're being asked to be Agile by leaders who are not letting go of a system that won't work with Agile. right? And there's a mindset that they have to change as leaders to let go and be willing to try something completely new and different to make that successful as well.
Another thing, Jeff, what I've learned through these series of attempts is even when I did begin to understand Agile at its core, and I took the interest to learn it and adapt it, what would happen is when I would see our teams being resistant to adapt it, I would go back to my old behaviors unknowingly, because I was then becoming very forceful or impatient and going back to what my old habits are, to be top down and like be command and control. So, like intent wise, I knew the benefits, I understood it, but behavior wise, I couldn't really embrace the right behaviors to create a conducive environment for the rest of the organization to go through their motions of transformation.
So Mo, how did you fix that? Like, how did you turn that around?
The last transformation attempt, I had to be fully invested into it from a mindset standpoint and recognize how my behaviors, as it pertains to not just Agile, but behaviors in general, together with my team, how to be empathetic towards my team, how to love my team and care for them and have a true empathy towards what they're going through, started to give me a lot more patience and recognition that everyone goes through their transformation in their own, and they process it their own way. And my job isn't to come in and just expect that to be embraced overnight. I have to be the coach. I have to remove all of their impediments and their issues and the problems that they're going through to embrace Agile. What can I do to remove those impediments? Is that more training? Is that more coaching? Is that more examples? And how am I leading by example to begin with?
Yeah, one thing that really stands out to me in the last success that we've had has been the change in like kind of what we would call the servant leadership approach to all of this, where I saw you really understanding what you were asking other people to do, and in fact rolling up your sleeves and doing it yourself to its fullest extent. And that act of demonstration and kind of leading by example really stood out to me as someone who's following you through that.
Thank you.
I think just a little bit of a different perspective. I agree with everything that Mo just said, especially about the empathy for your teams. And I'm in an interesting position where Chris and Mo and Jeff are all leaders to me and pouring into me. And then I have to take that and pour it into my teams that I work with day to day, which is interesting. And I think, for me, I had to figure out, how do I practice empathy with them? Because at the end of the day, like I am in a different spot on my transformation journey than they are. So what can I do to help them? Because there's a lot of fear. We talked about that earlier, fear of change. So how can you help them kind of work through that on their own? Because you can't force it on them. You can't do it for them. They have to work through it on their own. But how do I facilitate that for them? And for me, that's really looked like just sitting down and listening to what their fears are and trying to help them process through them in their own ways and figuring out what is blocking them even mentally from making this shift in their mind. Because once they're bought in, it's great and we are able to be aligned as a team. But if one person even on the team is still not bought in yet, the whole team suffers. And it can be really subtle even too. It doesn't even have to be someone who's just blatantly saying, I don't believe in this doesn't make sense to me, this isn't going to work. It can be very subtle. And so you have to just be able to pay attention to your teams and see how they're struggling with the transformation. That's been, I think, the biggest thing for me as a project manager, for sure.
Yeah. And I think another sort of reason why Agile can fail teams is the expectation of knowing what the end is and how every step is going to come into play before you even start. I know that, as you mentioned, being a leader on an Agile team, you try and okay, this is not about role, this is not about titles, this is about roles and coming together but when questions arise, they're still looking for the answer or for a very clear path. And so, practicing that empathy to help them, like, actually, the question that you're asking me is your direction, right? Like, I think if you apply like that thinking that's making you ask that question, you can actually find your own path, because you will naturally see that what you're asking is really a risk mitigation. It is really a chance to think through what the next step should be. And you might be the best person to figure that out before I come and tell you what to do and prescribe to you the best way forward. And so I'm also learning how to be a leader that empathizes in an agile team without always feeling like I have to have the answer, even if I know the answer, right? But not prescribing something that may create a stumbling block or become an impediment down the path.
Yeah, and with that too, like if you're someone who's never been in a position of leadership before and has never had to take full ownership of even a deliverable because your organization has been so top down, it's really scary to kind of step up and say, I'm going to own this and I'm going to make decisions on it, even if it's small, like even if it's not something that's going to make a huge impact. But it's really scary to kind of step up and say, you know what, I think I can do this. I think I know what's best, so let me give it a shot. That's really scary.
That's a great perspective to add, because that's why these things take years for companies to get through. Because even when you get the mindsets of the lead, let's say you get perfect mindsets across all your leadership, it doesn't change the fact that everyone's scared, out of their minds to make decisions when they never had to before. And it takes iterations of people making mistakes and seeing that it's okay, and having leaders focus on the learnings and not the failures. They have to see that, experience it, really trust that it's a real thing, and move on in order to build that agile muscle. And that just does not come through force, right? Like, I think that's just a great point you just made there, Maggie.
Yeah. So Jeff, I think it's ultimately coming down to how you look at Agile and their frameworks like Scrum as a process and implement the processes. Or are we going to focus on being Agile, which is clearly about the mindsets and behaviors? So I think it's important that we also talk about why some organizations fail in Agile is because they make it all about the process and tools. It's like, are we using Jira? Are we using Confluence? Are we following the step-by-step process of the ceremonies? And if they get stuck into the process and the tools and forget about the people and the interactions, individuals and the interactions and the behaviors around it, you're more than likely going to be doing Agile, but it's not going to garner you the benefits of being Agile.
Yeah. I love, I really feel for Maggie's position, because we've seen this play out where the top down does a little bit of Googling or research, or gets word that Agile is the way to go. And so they go, well, there it is. It's all laid out in black and white how to do Agile. And they pass it down to the next layer of leadership, especially in large organizations. Let's do Agile. And then that layer goes, all right, everybody beneath me, let's do Agile. And you reach this point where that middle kind of management or leadership, you'll always find that pressure point where everyone above them is working top down and expecting not to be part of this transformation. It's like, you guys down there take care of this, get Agile. And everyone beneath them is like, okay, we get it. It makes sense. And we're trying. But when they make mistakes, everyone above them is like, why are we failing? I thought we were doing Agile. I thought we were supposed to have figured this out. And it's so interesting to see that when you go back to, the manifestos and the documentation that really defines what Agile, Scrum, all these things are, everyone kind of skims over the very first page, which is that these are always founded in what they call values or principles. And what they're saying is culture. What they're saying is that your mindset comes first. None of this other stuff matters if you're not thinking about this the right way. It's so compelling. I feel for that middle management layer that has to balance that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I agree with you, Jeff, that it ties ultimately down to culture. If you're looking to have an Agile transformation rolled out inside of your organization, you cannot be successful with that strategic initiative unless your culture is in the right place. And as you know, we've spoken about this in multiple episodes. It all ties down to behaviors. Individual behaviors ladder up to the culture. And if you don't have the right culture in place, your agile transformation is more than likely going to fail.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think you're.
oh,
Oh, go ahead, Maggie. Sorry.
I was just going to say, if I didn't trust the three of you guys and the other leaders that were pouring into me, it would be really hard for me to turn around and say in earnest, the things that my team needs to hear in order to transform themselves. And it would just come across as disingenuine, and it wouldn't work. So I commend the leaders at Softway because they walk the talk, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They're not just telling us to go do, they're teaching us and coaching us, and it's been helpful for sure.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Maggie.
Yeah, I think we're tying it, or we're kind of already moving to this territory, but every episode I like to tie it back to love. We've already kind of walked down this path, but let's make it official. What's the tie into love? What's the takeaway for the listener here on when it comes to agile transformation, that connection to love? Who wants to take a crack at it?
I
Do you
do.
want to go more? Like, Mo seems really eager, so I don't want to get in the way of that.
Go
So
ahead, Chris. Why don't Chris start us off?
yeah, go ahead, Chris. You start.
It's like, are you sure, Muhammad? I don't want you to come after me later.
I'm
kidding. We don't do that in an agile company. There's no retaliation.
I want to practice. Go for it.
No, so I think for me, my biggest takeaway when it comes to agile and sort of thinking about it from a love angle is that when you really understand what an agile team does with each other and how they operate, like there is no way you are successful without the components of love, right? Like you truly are in a loving environment when you're operating in agile, whether that be hearing tough love, which comes in the form of, quality critical feedback, or it's that support that you get when you're struggling or falling behind or can't figure something out. And you have a team of people that are there with you to help you to figure it out, to drop what they're doing, right? Like you never feel, if you're truly in an agile team, alone. You never feel excluded. You never feel like, your silence is the only way to get along, so to speak. You really are in a loving environment.
Yeah. You actually said it really, really heavy. I was like waiting for Muhammad's big thing, and you nailed it.
Yeah.
I've always said, show me a truly high performing agile team and I'll show you love being practiced. Like that's like, it's just this weird thing that people don't connect all the time, but it's true. Those really high performing agile teams, there's just a real love in the air for them, for each other.
And I think the other just critical ingredient that you also see in a truly high functioning and high performing agile team is levity. It's not all the serious work where you're just, doing rocket science and heads down. There's, I mean, like you're laughing, you're joking, you're teasing each other, you're throwing shade at each other, right? You're experiencing, what it means to really sort of have all of those levels touched when it comes to, the jokes and the laughter, all the way down to the critical tough love that helps the team get better as a performing unit.
That's great. And so how about this? So for leaders that are listening, Mo, from your perspective, what advice or what's the takeaway you'd want them to take away from this specifically?
Sure. So from a leader standpoint, everything that Chris said is still applicable, right? The components of love as a leader, you also have to be able to demonstrate that towards the teams that you are leading. And for that, the best way to lead with love is to become a servant leader, where servant leadership is about putting the needs of your team before yours. And your job is to remove their impediments and issues and problems. So as a leader, the best thing you can do is get out of the way of getting your teams to become agile. You are more than likely the biggest obstacle in the agile transformation. And not only do you get out of the way, but you also help empower your team by providing them the support and the necessary guidance and giving them the resources to be able to be successful in their agile transformation. And by virtue of that, you're being a servant leader. And that is something that I would advise all leaders to consider.
And Maggie, from I guess the perspective of kind of middle management or just people who are caught between worlds, do you have any thoughts on love and the takeaway here?
Yeah, I think I think it comes down to a lot of trust. Like if you trust your team, to me, that's a big component of love is trust. And so if you can trust your team that they're going to do what it takes to get an outcome achieved, that team is going to be successful. And what that practically looks like, what that trust practically looks like is a lot of times, asking someone to step in if you get sick. That happened this week with one of my teams. Someone got sick, and so someone else on the team's like, you know what, I'll take her stuff off her plate so she can take a rest day and not have to worry about it. Or team members moving meetings around because other team members have kids at home. Like that's a big piece of being able to trust your teams in order to and thinking about your team's needs, like Mo said before, your own, because if you're being selfish, you can't jive with a team. Like you just can't put yourself first. You can only achieve those outcomes if you are working as a unit, as a team. So I think trust is a big one for me, and unselfishness. So selflessness or servant leadership are two major ones.
Nice. Yeah, love is never selfish, right? By definition. So it's actually really, really pointed. Awesome. So in closing, agile transformation is a topic, but as you can see, there's just so much to talk about when it just comes to the role that culture plays. Understated by many, and we know we've seen it. We have a lot more to say on it. I foresee future topics and episodes further diving into like how this actually plays out. But for the time being, thank you guys for joining me. As always, it was a pleasure. For our listeners out there, we love the feedback. Every Friday, we're posting these episodes, and we'd love to hear what you'd like to talk about. Any feedback you have, softway.com/labs, LAABS. And if you like what you heard today, it would be really helpful if you left us a review or a subscription on Apple Podcasts, and it'd make a big difference for us. So with that, we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.